So here's a fresh observation you've probably never heard before. Hollywood is allergic to new ideas. Not exactly a hot take, but that doesn't make it wrong. If you look at the top 50 all-time top-grossing films at the U.S. domestic box office, you'll see that 41 of them are either sequels or adaptations of pre-existing properties. Only 2 films in the top 10 are neither a sequel or an adaptation of a popular pre-existing property: Avatar and Titanic. And while Avatar itself isn't a sequel or an adaptation, it's going to contribute some more evidence to support my observation, because there are sequels coming. Soon. James Cameron insists, just any day now. Whole bunch of Avatar sequels. Come on, James, the whole world is holding its breath for those additional Avatar movies. December 16th, you say? Oh man, that's too bad. I was already planning to see, Shazam! Fury of the Gods comes out that day too. I'm definitely seeing that instead. Anyway, the point is, movie studios like it when the movies they release make money. Money is important to the economy of the motion picture business because it can be used to make more movies, to compensate the people who work on the movies for their labor, to pay for the literal mountains of illicit drugs demanded by top stars and executives alike, and to compel witnesses, victims, and guilt-ridden perpetrators to keep silent about the ever-growing web of scandal, crime, and abuse that threatens to destroy the entire industry at any moment. And one of the easiest and most reliable ways to increase a movie's odds of grossing tons and tons of money is to make the movie about something the viewing public knows about already. Look again at that all-time top box office grosses list, and you'll see examples of a few different ways Hollywood studios have taken advantage of audience familiarity to make incredibly successful films. There are lots of entries in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is a franchise of dozens of interconnected films based on Marvel Comics characters, most of which had built-in fan bases prior to the making of their films. There are movies like The Dark Knight and The Incredibles 2, sequels to previous popular films, plus The Dark Knight is a Batman movie, so it falls into the same category as the MCU. There are adaptations of The Hunger Games and Lord of the Rings books, which, like the MCU, also had loyal audiences that predated the films. There are movies like the 2019 version of The Lion King and the 2017 version of Beauty and the Beast, remakes of treasured classics. And there are movies like Star Wars: The Force Awakens, Jurassic World, and Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. They're examples of the kind of movie I want to focus on in this video. They're sequels, but they're a very particular type of sequel. They're sequels produced to films released many years, even decades before, which often bring back the original actors from those earlier films to reprise their beloved characters and continue stories which most of us assumed were over and done. They are legacy sequels! I just did that for the thumbnail. Moving on. Legacy sequels have been around for a long time, but they've been particularly common over the last 15 years or so. In 2008, Paramount Pictures and Lucasfilm took a big swing with Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, in which Harrison Ford reprised arguably his most iconic character on the big screen for the first time in nearly 20 years. It made a ton of money, but the critical and fan reactions were kinda mixed. Lots of people liked it. I personally thought it was fine. But the folks who didn't like it really didn't like it. Still, like I said, it made a lot of money. Enough money that a couple of years later, Disney rolled out its own legacy sequel, Tron Legacy. Literally, it's got in the title. Tron Legacy features Jeff Bridges reprising his role from the original Tron, which came out almost 30 years before. And also Bruce Boxleitner. Good for you, Bruce. Always nice to see you get a payday. The movie itself is heavy on special effects, shallow when it comes to story and characters, and it made a lot of money, but not nearly as much money as it should have made, given how aggressively it was marketed. So, yeah, pretty much the perfect sequel to Tron. But Disney was not deterred by Tron Legacy's underwhelming performance at the box office. Instead, those clever Disney executives thought, hey, what if we made a Legacy sequel to a movie people actually liked? And then the light bulb went off, and Disney bought Lucasfilm in 2012, and 3 years later released the Legacy sequel that would rejuvenate a venerable franchise and spawn 1,000 other Legacy sequels, Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. And it made all the money. With the stars of the original Star Wars trilogy returning, including Harrison Ford, who reprised arguably his most iconic character for the first time in over 30 years, plus a young cast of newcomers, The Force Awakens appealed to longtime fans and people discovering Star Wars for the first time. It won praise from people who liked the prequel trilogy and from people who would know a good movie if they saw one as well. Not everybody thought it was great, or even good, but the reactions from critics and fans were overwhelmingly positive. It was widely received as a good film, an entertaining film, a film that bound the fandom together. And, in case I neglected to mention it, it made all the money. An unrelenting torrent of Legacy sequels followed in its wake, flooding cinemas and streaming services with belated continuations of popular movies, series, and franchises for years afterward, a flood that has yet to abate up to this very day. Independence Day Resurgence, Terminator Dark Fate, Ghostbusters Afterlife, The Matrix Resurrections, even Blade Runner 2049, which features Harrison Ford reprising arguably his most iconic character for the first time in 35 years. And there are more to come. Currently scheduled for release or in the works are Legacy sequels to Top Gun, Legally Blonde, Hocus Pocus, Enchanted, The Exorcist, Twins, Beverly Hills Cop, Sister Act, Clerks, and Mallrats, plus those aforementioned Avatar sequels, and another Indiana Jones. Finally, movie studios have figured out what we really want to see. Old actors returning to play the same parts they played when they were young actors. Television has not been unaffected by this trend either. The last several years have seen shows from the 1980s, 90s, and 2000s, such as Will and Grace, Roseanne, Murphy Brown, Gilmore Girls, Mad About You, Punky Brewster, Saved by the Bell, Law and Order, Full House, and The X-Files reprised with original cast members. There's also Star Trek Picard, which isn't exactly a sequel/reprisal of Star Trek The Next Generation, but does star Patrick Stewart returning to the role of Jean-Luc Picard and Jerry Ryan playing Seven of Nine, so it's Legacy sequel-ish. There's obviously a downside to all this. While movies and TV shows like these can provide us with a satisfying nostalgia fix, they don't really help us to build a creative, vibrant, diverse popular culture that lives and breathes and evolves, and I think that's important. Our art, especially our popular art, our movies, our TV shows, is a way for us to show ourselves who we are. Do we want to be a people who are constantly looking backwards, who would rather be reminded of stuff we liked in the past than discover new stuff in the present? I'm not saying we aren't actually those people. I'm saying, do we want to be? Because if we follow that path too long or too exclusively, it leads to the stagnation and death of our popular culture. Also, more immediately, there's a limited window in which legacy sequels and reprisals of films and TV shows that were popular decades ago can be made. One of these days, Harrison Ford is going to fly off in one of those vintage single-engine planes of his and just never come back. I think one of the reasons legacy sequels have become so popular these last few years is that A lot of us were getting sick of reboots and remakes, but once the original casts of all the old movies and TV shows we loved when we were kids have been swallowed up by the insatiable and perpetually devouring maw of the grave, reboots and remakes will be all we have left, and then we'll know something. But while that downside is definitely a thing I worry about, there are two mitigating factors that bring me some comfort. First, this is nothing new. Like I said, before legacy sequels, it was reboots and remakes. Hollywood's practice of rewarding banality more than creativity is long-standing, and yet new, original, innovative filmmakers have always been able to break through and tell their stories. Second, some of the legacy sequels released in recent years have actually been pretty good. A few, like Cobra Kai, the new Saved by the Bell, and Ryan Coogler's Creed have been outstanding, in part because they have ambitions beyond simply revisiting familiar territory. They don't just put the actors back in their old costumes and trot them out for a belated curtain call. They recontextualize them, show them to us from new angles. They are acts of deconstruction and reconstruction, both critiquing and celebrating the original works. I think that's the key to a successful legacy sequel. There needs to be an artistic reason for it to exist, as well as a commercial one. Roger Ebert used to say, it doesn't matter what a film is about, it matters how it is about it. There's nothing inherently wrong with bringing back original cast members to revisit old characters, but it helps if the new film, besides having a story worth telling in its own right, has something to say about the characters, about the original film, about something other than, hey, remember this? Even legendary filmmaker and noted critic of current movie industry trends, Martin Scorsese, has done it. The Color of Money is a legacy sequel to The Hustler, and a good one. Hell, the idea of revisiting familiar characters long after the last time we saw them is a practice in literature going back thousands of years. Sophocles wrote Oedipus at Colonus over 20 years after he wrote Oedipus Rex. That's not a perfect example, because even though we think of Oedipus Rex, Oedipus at Colonus, and Antigone as a trilogy, they weren't written that way, and they were written and originally produced out of order. Antigone was written first, but is last in terms of the order of events in the plays, which, to our modern sensibilities, makes Oedipus Rex and Oedipus at Colonus prequels, except they weren't written with that intention. Best we can tell, Sophocles viewed them each as an independent work, unrelated to the other two, but still, we have the general idea of a work revisiting established characters many years later. Not a legacy sequel exactly, but the seed of legacy sequels to come. They've been around this long, and whether we like it or not, we better get used to them because they don't seem to be going anywhere. The legacy sequels trend doesn't look like it's going to run out of steam anytime soon. However, it does seem to be mutating somewhat. Like I said earlier, there are plenty of legacy sequels in the works right now, but there are also films that are not full-on legacy sequels, but which add some legacy ingredients into their mix. The best recent example of this is the film Spider-Man No Way Home, which centers on Tom Holland's version of Spider-Man, the one who's been part of the MCU since Captain America Civil War was released in 2016, but which also brings in Tobey Maguire's version of Spidey from the mid-2000s Sam Raimi trilogy and Andrew Garfield's version from the Spidey films directed by Mark Webb in the early 2010s. Besides the multiple Spideys, the film also features several villains from the Maguire and Garfield films, also played by their original actors. Neither the Maguire Spidey nor the Garfield Spidey are quite old enough to qualify as legacy sequels on that basis, though where you would draw that line is obviously subjective, but they are both from series that have since been rebooted and replaced, and thus the expectation from pretty much everybody was that those versions of the character had had their run and we wouldn't be seeing them again. However, there's another actor reprising a superhero role he left behind whose return qualifies as the stuff of legacy sequels, both because his particular version of the character was seemingly finished and because of how long it's been. Yeah, baby! Michael Keaton is returning as Batman in not one, but at least 2 upcoming projects from DC Films. The Flash, coming to theaters next year, and Batgirl, coming to HBO Max sometime after that, I'm guessing. Batgirl's never been given an exact release date. It was supposed to come out this December, but that was before The Flash was pushed back to June 2023, and Batgirl is apparently intended as a follow-up to The Flash, so I assume it will get pushed back as well, but I don't really know. Not the point. The point is, with both major superhero franchises, the MCU and the DCEU and its various semi-related satellite projects, about to fully embrace the concept of a multiverse, which justifies them simultaneously featuring multiple versions of the same characters, it looks like this sort of thing is what we can expect from the next wave of legacy sequels. Not just well-remembered characters played by their original actors returning to the screen, but doing so in order to interact with their younger, more contemporary counterparts. The downside to this sort of thing is that it can tempt filmmakers to indulge in lazy, obnoxious fan service, which is just another way of looking back at old stuff and saying, remember that thing you used to like? Here it is again, instead of doing something new. But the upside is, if the material is in the hands of people creative enough to eschew pandering references and callbacks and other fan servicey bullshit in favor of actually, writing something, it can yield some unexpectedly powerful moments. Moments that take advantage of our nostalgia, our affection for these characters, but that do more than simply draw our attention to the familiar. For example, this bit from Spider-Man No Way Home, when Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man is able to save MJ's life after a fall, something he wasn't able to do when Gwen Stacy fell, as seen at the end of The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Sure, there's an element of fan service to this bit, but it lands as much more than that because of its importance to the character. Even if you didn't see Amazing Spider-Man 2, the circumstances of Gwen's death are established earlier in No Way Home, so when this version of Spidey is able to rescue MJ from falling, it means something to us, because we see that it means something to him, and we know why. And if you did see The Amazing Spider-Man 2, it means even more because it provides a note of redemption for something that happened in an entirely different film series to a version of a character that had apparently been abandoned. There are other moments like that in No Way Home, a reformed Doc Ock holding an arc reactor and musing the power of the sun in the palm of my hand, only to turn around and see the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, his Spider-Man, standing there. And when Doc Ock asks how he's been, Spidey, echoing an exchange between the two of them from Spider-Man 2, replies, trying to do better. Fan service, undeniably, but also meaningful to these characters, and set up so that it makes sense in this film whether you've seen Spider-Man 2 or not. When viewed as something other than a marketing opportunity, or something in addition to a marketing opportunity, perhaps I should say, legacy sequels and incorporating legacy characters into newer narratives open up potential avenues of storytelling and characterization that can be so much deeper and more satisfying than cynical nostalgia fixes or shallow fan service. Instead of just passively reminding us of stuff we used to like, they can invite us to re-examine some of it, to reconnect with it in a way that is real and emotional, familiar, but also of this time, this moment. Spider-Man No Way Home does that. Cobra Kai does that. Creed does that. All of the best legacy sequels do that in some form or another. They show us characters we remember, characters with pasts they are struggling to redeem or resolve or transcend or escape or return to. And I bet most of us can relate to at least one of those. Characters who are as we remember them, but are different as well because they have moved on, or perhaps because they should have, but haven't. Works like these do something else, too, which I find even more amazing. They start us out with something familiar, but then they show us something unexpected. And for me, that's one of the most beautiful things art can do. I'll take all of it I can get. And if it happens to include Johnny Lawrence or the best Spider-Man, even better.